Have you ever noticed how two people can experience the exact same emotional event, the same breakup, the same rejection, the same disappointment, yet walk away carrying it in completely different ways? One person talks about it openly. They vent, they get angry, they distract themselves. They seem to move on outwardly. The other becomes quieter. They replay conversations at night. They question what they said. They analyze what they felt. They carry it inward, and more often than people like to admit, that second person is a woman. Now let's pause here, because this is where misunderstandings usually begin. This is not about women being weak. This is not about women being too emotional. And this is definitely not about men lacking emotional depth. What we're talking about is something far more complex. A difference in emotional processing shaped by biology, psychology, social conditioning, culture, and the modern world. Women do not internalize emotions because they don't know how to express them. They internalize emotions because over time they've learned that. Processing feelings inwardly is safer, more acceptable, and often more effective than expressing them outwardly. Once you understand why this happens, it changes how you see relationships, silence, emotional distance, mental health, and even breakups. So let's start with something important. Internalizing emotions does not mean suppressing them. It doesn't mean pretending nothing hurts. It means absorbing emotion and turning it inward. Instead of anger turning into confrontation, it turns into self-reflection. Instead of sadness turning into visible collapse, it becomes quiet withdrawal. Instead of frustration turning into conflict, it becomes emotional exhaustion. This is why so many women hear things like, "You never tell me what's wrong. You've been really quiet lately. You're overthinking." But silence does not mean the absence of emotion. Silence often means the emotion is happening everywhere inside at once. And neuroscience backs this up. Studies in emotional processing show that women, on average, encode emotional experiences more deeply in memory than men. Emotional events, especially those tied to relationships, rejection, or social connection, remain more cognitive, active in women's brains. That doesn't mean women feel more emotion. It means emotions stay online longer. When something emotionally charged happens, a woman's brain is more likely to replay it, analyze it, and extract meaning from it over time. That replaying is what people casually call overthinking. But what's actually happening is emotional processing. And this pattern doesn't appear of nowhere. It starts early. From childhood, girls and boys receive very different emotional messages. Girls are often asked, "How did that make you feel? Why are you sad? It's okay to cry." Boys are often told, "Be strong, don't cry, shake it off." Neither message is intentionally harmful, but over time, they shape emotional behavior. Girls learn that emotions are something to not ice, reflect on, and manage internally. Boys learn that emotions are something to control, release, or push past. So when adulthood arrives and stress hits, those patterns activate automatically. A man under stress might externalize through action, working longer hours, physical activity, distraction, withdrawal, or anger. A woman under stress is more likely to internalize, questioning herself, monitoring emotional dynamics, worrying about impact, and carrying emotional responsibility silently. This difference becomes especially visible in relationships. When conflict happens, many men want closure, resolution, movement forward. Many women want understanding, meaning, context. So a man might say, "Let's just move on." A woman might think, "But we haven't processed what this means." That gap isn't stubbornness. It's different emotional processing styles colliding. Now let's talk about something modern that has intensified this pattern: social media. Women are more likely to engage with emotionally resonant content online. They reflect, they write, they observe, they emotionally connect. But at the same time, women are also more likely to be judged, attacked, or dismissed for expressing strong emotions publicly. So what happens? Expression becomes risky, silence becomes safer, emotion goes inward. A woman may feel deeply, but choose restraint. Not because she doesn't feel enough, but because she feels too much to risk being misunderstood, and this internalization adds up, not in one dramatic moment, but through thousands of small emotional experiences absorbed quietly. That's why so many women describe feeling emotionally exhausted without being able to point to a single reason. It's not one trauma, it's accumulation, and this has real psychological consequences. Women experience higher rates of anxiety and depression not because they are fragile, but because internalized emotion keeps the nervous system activated longer. Emotion that doesn't move outward stays active inward. It becomes rumination. And rumination is one of the strongest predictors of emotional burnout. But here's what rarely gets acknowledged. Internalization also creates strengths. Women who internalize emotions often develop deep emotional perception. They notice tone shifts, body language, unspoken tension, changes in energy. Because when you spend your life processing emotio, and inwardly, you become highly skilled at reading it in others. The problem isn't internalization itself. The problem is when society benefits from women's emotional awareness while offering no space for emotional release. When women are expected to understand everyone, but no one pauses to understand them. When silence is mistaken for peace, that's when misunderstandings begin. A woman going quiet doesn't mean she doesn't care. Often, it means she cares so deeply that she's overwhelmed, and when that internalization reaches a limit, it doesn't explode loudly, it shuts down quietly. This is why people say she changed overnight. She just walked away. She didn't even explain, but the explanation happened internally long before the exit. And unless we understand this psychological reality, women's silence will continue to be misread as indifference instead of emotional overload. Now we need to go deeper, because this isn't just habit or personality. This is biology. Emotion is not just thought. It is a biological event. Every emotional experience activates hormones, neural pathways, and memory systems. And women's bodies are biologically tuned to hold emotional information, CLE information, tied to connection, safety, and belonging. Research shows women encode emotional memories with more contextual detail. So, when a woman remembers an argument, she doesn't just remember the words, she remembers the tone, the pause, the feeling in her chest, the shift in connection. Men often remember what happened. Women remember how it felt. And because emotional memory is her emotional experiences linger longer. This is why a woman can say, "I'm over it," and still feel affected weeks later. Not because she wants to hold on, but because her nervous system hasn't finished processing. Now let's talk hormones, not stereotypes. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, plays a major role here. Women tend to experience stronger oxytocin responses during emotional interactions, especially in close relationships. That means emotional moments carry more relational weight. When something goes wrong emotionally, the body doesn't just experience stress, it experiences threat to connection, and threat to connection triggers vigilance. Vigilance looks like replaying conversations, monitoring behavior, anticipating emotional outcomes, trying to prevent future pain. This is not overthinking, it's protection. Meanwhile, men's stress responses are more often linked to action-oriented hormones like adrenaline and testosterone. Those prepare the body to do something, so men are more likely to externalize stress through action or distance. Neither response is wrong, but when one person externalizes and the other internalizes, misunderstanding becomes inevitable. A man might think, "Why are you still thinking about this?" A woman might think, "Why don't you care enough to think about this?" Both are missing each other. Now let's talk about trauma, especially emotional trauma. Women are more likely to experience chronic emotional invalidation, not always dramatic events, but repeated dismissal, minimization, being told they're too sensitive. Over time, the nervous system learns something dangerous. Expressing emotion is unsafe, so emotions turn inward. Internalization becomes survival. If I speak, I'm dramatic. If I react, I'm too much. If I ask, I'm needy. So women adapt. They process quietly. They blame themselves first. They carry weight alone. This doesn't happen suddenly. It happens slowly. And that's why many women don't realize they're internalizing until they're exhausted. Now, add modern American pressure. Women today are expected to be emotionally intelligent, professionally competent, socially graceful, resilient, independent, and endlessly adaptable. That's an enormous emotional load. And when you're constantly managing perception, emotions turn inward. You begin anticipating before acting, rehearsing before speaking, managing emotions before they even occur. This is emotional labor, and emotional labor happens silently, which brings us to a painful truth. Because women internalize emotions, their pain often goes unseen. There's no explosion, just withdrawal, and people misread that. She never said anything, but she did, internally, for months, sometimes years. By the time a woman stops talking, she's often already emotionally depleted. Silence is not the beginning, it's the end. And this is where men feel blindsided. Because men expect emotional signals to be visible. Women often send signals inward long before expression. Now let's talk about anxiety. Anxiety isn't fear, it's preparation, and internalized emotion keeps the brain constantly scanning for emotional threat. Past pain is replayed to prevent future pain. This creates an exhausting loop. Now add constant emotional exposure. News, social media, comparison, trauma narratives. Women absorb more, not because they're weak, because they're perceptive. This is why many women feel tired without knowing why. They're emotionally overstimulated. Now let's talk dating. Early on, women often internalize concerns instead of expressing them immediately. They notice patterns. They feel discomfort. But instead of speaking up, they ask themselves questions. Am I overreacting? Should I wait? Should I give grace? While she's processing internally, the other person assumes everything is fine. By the time she speaks, the weight has already grown. And if she's dismissed, internalization deepens. Eventually, emotional distancing begins. Not because he stopped caring, but because caring alone hurts. This is why relationships often end quietly. Women emotionally leave long before they physically leave. Not suddenly, gradually. And once emotional detachment happens, reversal is rare because the emotional work is already complete. Now let's talk about identity. For many women, emotions are tied to self-worth. Being emotionally aware is part of being good. So when something goes wrong emotionally, women internalize blame. What did I do wrong? Self-directed processing reinforces internalization, and culture rewards it. Women are praised for being strong, but only quietly. Anger is punished. Pain is minimized. So the message becomes clear. Feel deeply, but don't show it. Now let's talk about healing. Healing doesn't start with being louder. It starts with safety, internal safety, external safety. Women need permission to feel without fixing, without perfect wording, without guilt. Emotions need movement, not perfection. Journaling, therapy, voice notes, safe expression, boundaries. Boundaries are not aggression. They are emotional honesty. For men, healing doesn't require mind reading. It requires presence, listening without fixing, validation before solutions, saying, I hear you. Those words release what's been trapped. Now here's the truth that changes everything. Women do not internalize emotions because they are fragile. They internalize because they are attentive, because they notice, because they care, because they've been strong in silence for too long. And strength in silence has a cost. Understanding that cost is where empathy begins, and empathy is where connection becomes possible. If this resonated with you, then awareness has already begun. And awareness is where change starts, always.